Hey everyone, welcome back. My name is Sam.
And I'm Melissa.
I grew up in the FLDS community. It is a community run by Warren Jeffs, which I moved out of when I was 18 years old.
I was raised LDS. Sam and I have been married for 8 years and have 2 beautiful babies.
Yes, we do. Today we wanted to continue on with our review of the documentary Preaching Evil on Peacock.
Yes, we wanted to. There's a lot of information still with the last 2 episodes, but with how much stuff is coming out lately, like the Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey, and we keep getting more and more submissions about all these other videos for us to review and react to. And so we thought if we put these 2 together, we can react to another one next week and just kind of keep up the reaction videos for you guys and try to keep up with demand. So we're going to put these 2 in a little bit longer video because there is a lot of stuff that goes on in these last 2 episodes that are just like...
There's a lot to cover here, so we will try to touch on all of the most interesting points, or at least what we found most interesting, and talk about that and try to get through these last 2 episodes here in this video, hopefully within the next 20 minutes or so. So
yeah, if anybody else has been like watching along, it's episodes 3 and 4 are the last 2 episodes. And before we really get into that, we did also still want to mention the fact that if you are in the southern Utah area and you want to hear more about our story together in leaving the LDS church, we are going to be sharing that story and our spiritual journey live in southern Utah on Sunday, June 26th. So if you're in southern Utah, we'll have the link in the description, and we would obviously love to see you there.
Yes, we would. So if you can make it out of that would be fantastic. We'd love to see you. But it is short notice, so we totally understand. No pressure.
Yes, and also don't feel like you have to be a post-Mormon in order to come. There will be active members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints there as well. So
as always, we'll keep it as respectful as possible. So.
Yes. Anyway, so getting into...
Let's get into the review.
So at the end of episode 2, and then they kind of leave you on a little bit of a cliffhanger of Warren Jeffs finally being caught and being arrested and going into like his first early times there at the prison. When they showed the prison, it was crazy to me because I grew up in St. George. And so when they said he was sent to purgatory, I was in high school at this time and I don't really remember a lot about the trial happening in St. George, Utah. But I do know, like, when they said purgatory, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the prison in Washington County. So familiar with that. And when they were showing, like, pictures of the courtrooms and stuff, and that happened in St. George. And even though it was, like I said, I was just in high school, so I wasn't really very aware of everything that was going on. But it was surreal to watch it and be like, oh my gosh, all that was happening in my hometown, which was crazy.
And they showed clips of a lot of FLDS members surrounding the courthouse and that as this trial was going on, and they weren't really sure what they were there for, if they were trying to help him escape or something like that. So I can understand not knowing the people or their intentions. That could be pretty frightening, but for law enforcement.
Did you or your family ever go?
I know that members of my family went, but I never did. I was never a part of that group. And I was still there. I was still very much involved in a part of the FLDS community at that time, but just I never made it down to St. George to be a part of the group. There were times where I felt like I probably would, but it just never happened.
Gotcha.
But I do remember it very well. I remember people talking about, hey, let's go down and show our support and show that we don't agree with what the government is doing by protesting and standing in front of the courthouse during his trial.
Gotcha. And as he's being charged with these things in Utah, because obviously the show goes through different, like, him being charged in Utah and then in Texas.
Exactly.
But the Utah charges of accomplice to rape, when you guys heard those charges, what did the community overall think?
Well, like always, we just assumed that the law enforcement was working against God's work and that they were just trying to prosecute an innocent man. That was what we were always told. That's what I 100% believed. I believed that it was just Satan trying to work against God's work, and they were falsely accusing him of anything and everything. So we didn't believe any of it.
Did you guys know that it was something to do with younger polygamous wives, or did you not know about any of the charges at all?
I didn't know about the specific charges, but we assumed that it was against polygamy of some sort. I didn't really know too much about the really young. I did know of some younger marriages, but I didn't know that that's what he was being charged for.
Okay, I was just curious, like
Yeah.
how much they told you or how much
Yeah.
they didn't, or just like, don't believe anything you hear, or hey, it's because we're being persecuted for this specific
Well, to be
thing.
completely honest with you, I didn't think at that time, because of the way I was raised and taught, I didn't think that marrying an underage girl was really a big deal. I'd seen it throughout the community, and I assumed that's what God was asking of us. And so I just thought, well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And so if you look at it from those lenses, you can see why we just assumed that Warren did nothing wrong, and they were falsely accusing him of anything and everything. So
Well, yeah, because if God's commanding for
Right.
14-year-olds to be married, then it's
that's-
religious persecution rather than like a
and that's what I assumed. That's what everyone assumed.
yeah, man.
Yes.
So
So,
when Warren, they have tapes recorded of Warren coming out and saying that he does not believe he's a prophet, that he's a liar, it's not true, he's not guiding truth, and he ends up attempting suicide. So that is a lot. That is a lot of stuff to hear. Was that actually communicated from his brother who he said it to? Did the community actually get to hear about it?
I don't remember who exactly told me. It could have been my father, it could have been someone else in the community, but it was communicated to me somehow, and I was still a part of the community. I had not left yet when this happened, and it was someone told us. But of course, it was with the idea of, hey, if you hear about this, don't believe it. None of it is true. The recording, we were told the recording was fabricated, that it wasn't a real recording. He would never say that he wasn't the prophet, because of course he was. And so we didn't hear the actual recording. I didn't hear the actual recording until long after I had moved out, but we were just told that there was people claiming that he admitted to being a false prophet, but it wasn't true.
So it's more of a, if you hear the rumor, just know it's not true.
Exactly.
Not this is something that happened. And
I think it was the community trying to get in front of it and just trying to put it to rest before anyone else heard about it.
gotcha.
But obviously the recording is there, and it seems very real to me. So, but of course they're going to claim that it was just fabricated and nothing like that happened. And then as far as the trying to commit suicide, once again, I was under the assumption that maybe one of the guards got close to killing him or something, and they were going to try to blame it on a suicide instead of what actually happened. So we were always pinning it on law enforcement. All the negativity was pinned on law enforcement, and anything that if he would have died and would have succeeded in trying to commit suicide, we would have said, oh, someone in prison killed him.
He was a martyr.
Yeah,
Then he would
exactly.
go to martyr, right?
Yep.
What did the community teach you about suicide? Like, were there any, like I know Naomi, I believe in the video, was talking about how suicide was considered like worse than murder and was considered something really bad. Is that something that, like in your home, were you taught about that?
Oops, sorry. Kicking things here. Yes, we were. It wasn't something that was talked about a lot, but we were told that if you were to take your own life, it would be worse for you on the other side after this life than if you were, if someone else took your life. So we were told that it was a very bad and a very bad sin to commit. So, but they didn't. I don't remember them talking a lot about it.
I feel like because you guys had been taught that, I feel like it would almost make it easier to push that aside and believe it wasn't true.
Exactly.
Because you're like, there's no way he would have tried to commit suicide. Like, that's one of the worst sins you could commit.
Right.
So why on earth would we believe it? You know what I mean?
Not for a second. I never believed.
Yeah.
I never believed it. No.
Yeah.
So.
I can, like I said, I can imagine.
And I believe. Well, I know that there are still many, many members of this community that don't believe it to this day. With all the evidence out there, either they are ignoring the evidence or they just say, no, it's fabricated, never happened.
Yeah. So after he does that, and then, they kind of talk about, it kind of has a change of heart and goes back into, I am the prophet, I am the leader. mode and starts getting a lot more strict. Now, as he started to get more strict, you had already kind of left before things had gotten that strict. Is that right?
Yes. So I had moved out, I believe it was about 3 years after he was first arrested.
Yeah, 2009. Right?
And yes, so he, after that, well, yes, he went through all of this stuff in prison where he almost committed suicide and all of these different things were happening. And it didn't seem, I believe he was already in Texas prison before I moved out. But a lot of the really, really strict and I guess you could say crazy rules that he started coming up with were later on after I had moved out. Yes.
Okay, so you were never like not allowed to have milk or only eating certain foods.
No.
Okay.
No, none of that happened while I was there.
You're lucky. But we do
Yes.
know, for those of you who are like, did it actually happen? A lot of Sam's siblings,
Yes.
a lot of family friends. So we know for sure that that did happen.
Yes.
Just he was lucky enough to be out before it happened.
Exactly. I have a lot of siblings that left after I did, and so they got to they had to deal with a lot more of these things. And unfortunately, they have personal stories about these things happening.
Yeah. When he got the guilty verdict and it was for sure that he was going to be in prison, what was the vibe like in the community? Like, what did it seem like to you guys? Like, were you guys in disbelief? Like, did you think he wasn't going to be convicted at all? Or did you think he was like magically going to leave prison?
To be honest, yes. To be honest with you, I wasn't surprised at all that he was found guilty before the law, because we assumed that they were out to get him. So in my mind, I thought, oh, of course he was found guilty to them. In their eyes, they're going to say he was guilty, of course, right? But yes, I assumed, and we were told, and my mother would tell me this today, that eventually God will break down the prison walls and he will walk out a free man because he will be surrounded with God's power and no mortal man will be able to touch him because of the power of God surrounding him. So those are things that they believe. Those are things that I believed for some time, that it would just, I guess you could call it magical, but
Yeah.
that it was going to, the walls would break and like some Bible stories, those type of things would happen.
Gotcha. Crazy miracles.
Yeah.
So from that point, documentary kind of shifts to what was happening at the Yearning for Zion Ranch. And this is kind of like a big, heavy topic to kind of go over, and we'll kind of just hit the main points that kind of stuck out to us. Obviously, if you have a chance and you got to watch the documentary, there was a lot of things that were wrong about the way that the government handled everything. Obviously, they were going off of information that they heard. They found out later that information was not true. It was from somebody in Colorado. They were following in the pursuit of trying to protect someone that was innocent and young as far as they knew. So go ahead.
No, yeah. In case you didn't watch the show, basically a girl called in to law enforcement there in Texas and said that she was being held against her will. She was underage and she was being forced to have sexual interactions, and that she was basically with an older husband, and that these horrible things were happening to her. And she was claiming that she was in the ranch in Texas.
Yeah, and there was never anybody by that name, neither the husband's name that she gave him. It's very interesting that it comes from Colorado, because did that seem a little fishy to you? I think it's interesting because later this week on Friday, we had a chance to interview a good friend of ours, Manti, and he actually lived on the ranch after the raid had happened. He got sent out to the ranch. And he has a lot of great insight. Can't wait to share that video with you guys in that interview. But multiple times his family had been moved to Colorado to be safe. Yep. They kept saying that. So I think it's really interesting that this this person was in Colorado that was basically trying to get them caught, even though there wasn't truth to it.
Well, and she obviously had some kind of inside information, because she knew, first of all, she knew about the ranch. Second of all, she knew what was going on in the ranch to some degree. So my assumption is she's someone from out there that grew up in the FLDS community, probably was in the Colorado community for quite some time, and who knows, maybe was sent away or kicked out, and through animosity, she made this phone call to try to get them in trouble.
Yeah, they didn't mention that in the documentary. I just thought it was very interesting.
Right.
Because
I
we
agree.
just had that interview and we're like, oh, they were
It is
having
interesting.
people hide basically in Colorado. And it's just interesting the call came from Colorado and had that much insight to be able to say the right thing. So obviously the police were acting according to what they had been told, even though, from misinformation, right?
Yep.
So that whole situation is crazy because I can totally see both sides of it. The police think they're going in to protect a child. There is no child. All the people there, I can't even like fathom going through what they went through.
The mothers having to be ripped away from their children and that I just, obviously it was not the right way to handle it.
No. And the one attorney I think said it really well when she said, you can't assume that because even if something had happened within one family, you can't assume that that means that every single family that bad thing is happening in any group of people, right? So to have all of the children from all of the mothers ripped away for, what was it? So the moms went with them at one point, and then after that, it was another 6 weeks before.
With the
before the
children
one
and the
mother
mother were apart. Yes,
Yeah.
It was 6 weeks of that. And the mothers throughout that entire 6 weeks had no idea if they were ever going to see their children again or what was going to happen. And some of these children were just toddlers and infants, I don't know about the infants for sure, but I know there were a lot of young children.
Yeah, a lot of young children,
So,
which because the whole case kind of started with an underage marriage, I'm really surprised, honestly, that they even took away the youngest children anyway. You know what I mean? Like, I know they said they started with girls, 7 to 17. But still, just so sad to see all the things that happened with all of those women and children. And it's just one more time where you can look and you go, no wonder they felt like people were out to get them, right? We knew from these other episodes that Warren Jeffs, these things that were happening were within a very small group. Most of the people and most of the women and pretty much all the children, none of them knew the perverted things that Warren Jeffs was doing. Yeah. They did not know. They were not complicit in it. They didn't would have no clue.
Yeah, I most certainly had no idea while I was out there what was going on. And to your point, Melissa, it's true. This experience, the raid in Texas, if anything, strengthened the belief and testimony in Warren Jeffs as a prophet, because he had testified of these things, that they were going to happen, that the government was going to come and rip them apart, that they were going to do all of these things if they weren't righteous enough. So, of course, all of this happening just put a bunch of guilt and shame on the mothers, because they thought, oh, it's all because of us. Warren told us that if we weren't righteous enough, if we weren't good enough, if we weren't following the rules perfectly, that this would happen. And so they just said, well, of course, they were, I can't imagine the excruciating 6 weeks they all went through.
Yeah, and like you said, all as a testimony builder. You would think that it would, most of those cops are thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to be able to help them get out of it. And little did they know, all they're doing is reaffirming all of the fears and all of the things that would keep women and children in there to begin with. So, whole crazy thing. Definitely watch it for yourself. Be able to see what happened with that. That's kind of all we're going to say about that. But that leading to getting a hold of the priesthood records and the records that Warren Jeffs had Naomi had kept for Warren Jeffs very diligently. The next thing we kind of wanted to touch on was, it's really interesting when they were talking about the recording of the 12-year-old and Warren Jeffs.
And then just really quick before we get into that, it's interesting that they went into this, they I guess, rushed to the ranch or raided the ranch, trying to find this underage girl to help her and get her away from the situation. They had no idea that they were about to find all of these records, tape recordings, and all this written down information that just, it was just so much hard evidence of what Warren has been doing, and that's the reason that he was even sent to Texas on trial anyways, was because of all the information they accidentally stumbled upon while trying to find this young girl in the ranch that wasn't even there. So the whole thing is just very interesting. But yes, they came across all these records and tape recordings, and that's kind of where we led off there. So
yeah, it's the fact that the way, obviously Warren deserves to be in prison, most definitely, but it's very interesting the way that it all happened to have him end up with his final sentencing.
Right.
Very, very interesting the way that everything came about. But so going into when they started talking about the recording of Warren with his 12-year-old bride. Now, obviously, it was his bride, right? There's pictures of them kissing, him holding her. Obviously, pedophilia. Okay, no doubt about that at all. So when we say our next opinion on this, it's still grateful he's in jail for it. And I'm not saying that he did not have sexual relations with this girl, because I am sure he did, because he did with all of his other wives, okay?
That we know of.
However, when they started playing the recording, Sam and I were looking at each other, and, all of these people who have no experience in LDS or FLDS blessings, to them, they were saying how creepy it sounded, and that there is no other way that the recording could be thought of other than sexual. And as Sam and I were listening to the beginning of the recording, we kept waiting, and we kept waiting.
For the evidence that it wasn't just a blessing.
For the evidence that it was sexual, because as he was talking and as he was speaking and the things he was saying, Sam and I looked at each other and were like, this just sounds like a blessing. Mm-hmm. What a priesthood blessing would be. When he says he lays his hands upon her head, that's the beginning of a priesthood blessing. Everything that he said. Now, I can understand taking a step back and not being familiar with priesthood blessings, how that would everything he said could come off sexually. But as Naomi said when she said it was just a blessing, I'm inclined to believe her. I mean, they didn't show any other witnesses saying that they saw it happen. And so I've heard in another documentary that we're going to be watching soon, maybe there's witnesses and then we can believe like their testimony. But what was actually like said in the whole beginning of the recording was very typical of a normal priesthood blessing in the LDS or the FLDS.
Yes, and it's hard. I mean, the law enforcement, they from the beginning they said it's very obvious that it's sexual, very, very obvious, and like Melissa said, we kept waiting, but there, I mean, towards the end, and maybe they didn't share the entire recording on the video.
I want to go honestly. I want to kind of go find the whole thing to see. There must have. I was like the whole maybe time. I'm like, there's more. There's more. Uh-huh. There's more than what they're just sharing on the documentary.
Maybe there's something we're missing. I don't know. And there was at one point that he said, "Okay, now get on the other side of the bed." I mean,
the bed thing was the only thing to me that was
well,
off.
What's going on there?
Compared to a normal blessing, at least of the recording they shared in this one documentary.
Yes. So, but it's interesting that Naomi now obviously doesn't believe in Warren Jeffs and doesn't believe any of that stuff anymore. She still claims full-heartedly that this was just a blessing and that it wasn't anything sexual. So, I don't know why she would try to claim that if it was.
I don't know. I mean, unless she's trying to not be an accomplice to rape. I don't know.
Maybe she's trying to, yeah, you're right. Maybe there's something there.
Yeah. The only other thing I want to say too is when he was giving the blessing or whatever was happening in that recording, which sounded like a blessing to us, and he's laying his hands upon her head and the things he's saying, then he asked, how are you feeling? Mm-hmm. Or are you feel? Yeah. How are you feeling?
How do you feel?
How do you feel? Mm-hmm. I totally get why that sounds super creepy to people from the outside. That is a very, very common thing to be asked after receiving a priesthood blessing.
Yeah.
Very common. I was asked it after I was baptized. I'm at 8 years old. Oh, how do you feel? Mm-hmm. That was something very common because we're told that we have the gift of the Holy Ghost, who is going to tell you through your feelings when things are true, when things are good. And so when he says, how do you feel? Or, yeah, I might be
something along those
lines
yeah.
of how do you feel? I don't believe that didn't sound sexual to me because it sounded like what you would typically say at the end of a blessing. Yeah. Is that your experience with blessings in the FLDS?
Yes, very common to say, oh, how do you feel after receiving a blessing? Because it's supposed to be a very spiritual and special experience. Now, I'm not trying to justify Warren's actions by any means.
Definitely not.
We're just pointing out that we're probably not the only ones that after hearing that recording might wonder, well, who knows what was going on there. To a lot of people, it seemed very, very obvious, but I don't know. The get on the other side of the bed part was the one thing that I thought, I don't know what's going on. First of all, why is a bed even included? So I mean, that whole portion seems very fishy to me. But yeah. But when everyone else was saying that from the beginning, it sounded like it was a sexual thing. That wasn't the case for us.
Yeah, not from our experiences.
Yeah.
So that was a little interesting for us to be like, oh my goodness, that's not where our minds went with it. We can totally see where someone who's never had a priesthood blessing before would feel that way. It makes perfect sense from the outside. But when you've been raised from the inside of it, that seemed very typical.
Yeah.
Most of what he was saying.
Yes, and it goes on and on. So many things happen in these 2 episodes. I would just recommend watching them because we can't get into every detail. But just a thought that I had while we were watching this, and it's because so many of these people, they would say that they didn't feel like they could speak up, or even if they didn't feel like it was right, they didn't feel like they could speak up. They didn't feel like they had any say in the matter, and that was very typical. That was very typical for everyone out there, for me included. I mean, everything was so controlled that if I didn't feel like something was just right, I didn't feel like I could ever stand up and say something about it, right? I mean, thankfully, I didn't have to deal with any of this, some of the crazier things you hear about with the sexual things and things like that. And I actually was never married out there. So anyway, I didn't have to deal with a lot of it, but I will say that even to this day, I find myself at sometimes, if I'm in a situation where I don't feel comfortable, I have a hard time standing up, and saying, hey, this isn't right, or I don't feel comfortable. I still catch myself sometimes hesitating because of the way I was raised, not really being able to have a voice in the matter. So anyway, just an interesting thought that I had as I was listening to so many of these people on the show say that they didn't feel like they had a choice. Or that they weren't sure what to do.
Yeah, kind of the last thing we wanted to kind of touch on is, as it was all closing up and the different women were kind of just sharing where they're at now in life, I'm sure a lot of people, especially people who have never been LDS before or Mormon before, are wondering how somebody could go from both of the women both stated that they now identify as Mormon or mainstream LDS instead of FLDS. And I know so many people, and we've gotten comments a lot on it, where people are like, how on earth could you go from one prophet like that and then go to another church that is built pretty much the same way in authority type ways? And how could you go from FLDS to LDS? And so just to give a little light on that, because that is Sam's story as well. Correct. What do you think? Why do you feel like these women ended up becoming mainstream LDS after leaving the FLDS and everything they went through?
Yes. Everyone has a personal experience. Everyone has their personal journey, and it's always different. So it's hard to pinpoint exactly what happened with them and what it was that caused them to want to join another religion. Because you can imagine, and I will speak for most people that do leave, that I've talked to, they say that they would never want to join another religion because they dealt with all of that, and once they believed, or once they found out that it wasn't true, they, in their mind, they thought, well, nothing can be true as far as religion goes. But as far as joining another religion, or specifically the mainstream LDS church, I believe that it was the most comfortable, familiar church that they could find. And when you are taught your entire life a certain way, the church was our life. It was everything. We lived for the church. And then all of a sudden, you don't have anything to quote unquote live for. You feel this emptiness that you need something. You need something that gives you purpose in life. And I feel that a lot of people look for that, and they find something that feels familiar, and they find something that is, the scriptures are very, very similar. They use a lot of the same scriptures, sing a lot of the same songs. And so anyway, I think that's probably one of the main reasons that people join the LDS church after leaving the FLDS church.
Well, and you have to remember too that a lot of the similarities, there's so many similarities, and a lot of the church history and a lot of the core doctrine is the same. And so I'd say it's kind of like they don't want to, or I'm not trying to speak for them, but I would assume you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? You have all these other doctrinal beliefs that you believe in, and to realize that there's a false prophet or not believe in Warren Jeffs anymore isn't necessarily going to change these other 50 million things that you believe. And so when you go to a different place and you're like, all these other core things that I believe line up, and I can take out the one piece or the few pieces that were troublesome. If I can take away Warren Jeffs, I can take away the overwhelming control. Some people might think that the LDS church has a lot of rules, but compared to the FLDS, you're flying free, baby.
Freedom.
Comparatively, yes. That is like having all the freedom in the world. And so really, like you said, familiarity, there's going to be a comfort level. And then also most of the people that were leaving, or even these women, you can always see it, I feel like, a lot in Naomi's eyes. It always makes me feel really sad for her. You can tell that they didn't leave because they stopped believing, right? It wasn't,
in Naomi's case, she was forced out.
Yeah, she was forced out. But it was like, how do I say that? It's not like, oh, we found out these things weren't true, so I can walk away, right? It was like these really hard things for them, realizing something's just not right. And they might not even know what that is until after they leave, other than a gut feeling, or I want to be with my children, or I'm being isolated, or I'm being kicked out. I don't know why. And so their core beliefs did not change.
Yeah.
And so going somewhere where they can keep their core beliefs would just make sense.
True. And I would also add that a very powerful word is love. And I feel that we were being raised in that type of religion. We were often taught to always try to feel the Spirit. It's because we were told that we had the Spirit with us. And so I feel that a lot of times people will mix the two feelings of, or not necessarily mix, but when they're feeling this warm, comforting feeling that they would call the Spirit, I think oftentimes it was love. And whether it was because they were with loved ones, family, friends, people that they felt welcome and loved and had that warm feeling, and if they felt that while talking with some members of the LDS church, maybe they felt that and they thought, well, this is the Spirit talking to me. This has got to be where I should be. This has got to be right. So anyway, that's just an opinion, I guess, but I'm not sure exactly what everyone experienced. But
yeah, just our final thoughts on that. So if you guys would like to hear more of what it was like for Sam growing up in polygamy and would like to hear more of our reactions to, I know there's a lot
coming out.
Yeah, a lot of FLDS content coming out right now. We are going to be doing the one on Netflix next, and we'll probably just be doing them in addition to our normal Q&A and interview videos so that we have time to be able to get through all this content.
Keep up with everything.
So put in the comments what videos you would like us to react to, TV shows, anything like that. That has to do with polygamy.
And thank you for all of you that have already done that for us.
Yes.
You're the reason that we want to go respond so quickly to the Netflix series, because we keep seeing your comments and okay, we got to do this.
We got to do it. We got to do it now.
So anyway, we're looking forward to that one next, and we'll get that for you as soon as possible.
Yeah. Thank you all, and we'll talk to y'all soon.
We'll talk to you soon.